On January 2012, a single sentence from a high-ranking official in Tehran caused the price of global crude oil to jump 4% in less than 60 minutes. The threat was simple. If Western sanctions continued to tighten, the Islamic Republic would place a lock on the Strait of Hormuz. To the uninitiated, this sounded like typical geopolitical posturing. But to the analysts at the International Energy Agency, it was a nightmare scenario. Through that narrow neck of water, barely 21 miles wide at its tightest point, flows 1/5 of the entire world's liquid energy. It is the jugular vein of the global economy. For decades, the conventional wisdom held that if Iran closed the strait, the world would descend into darkness. But while the world's cameras were fixed on the gray hulls of the United States Fifth Fleet and the fast attack boats of the Revolutionary Guard, a different kind of weapon was being forged in the silence of the desert. It did not have wings, it did not carry a warhead, and it did not make a sound. It was 360 kilometers of steel buried under the shifting sands of the empty quarter. This was the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, a $3.3 billion gamble that was about to turn the Middle East's most feared strategic trump card into a historical footnote. Something was fundamentally wrong with the math of the planned blockade. While Tehran counted its missiles, the United Arab Emirates was counting its pump stations. The investigation into how this happened reveals a story not of admirals and generals, but of engineers, sovereign wealth funds, and a quiet shift in the very foundations of energy logistics. Why did $3 billion succeed where decades of military buildup had failed? Who was truly behind the construction that bypassed the most dangerous waterway on Earth? And what did they see that the rest of the world missed? The central mystery begins with a paradox. On paper, the Strait of Hormuz is indefensible for the global economy. On one side, the rugged mountains of the Musandam Peninsula. On the other, the jagged coastline of Iran. Between them, a shipping lane only 2 miles wide in each direction. It is a geographical choke point designed by nature for a siege. Since the tanker war of the 1980s, when over 500 ships were targeted in these waters, the world believed that only a massive military presence could keep the oil flowing. The hero of this investigation is not a person, but a project designated as the Abu Dhabi Crude Oil Pipeline, or ADCOP. The plan was as audacious as it was expensive. It aimed to move 1,500,000 barrels of oil per day directly from the giant Habshan field in the west of the Emirates to the port of Fujairah on the east coast. By doing so, the oil would emerge on the shores of the Gulf of Oman, completely bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. It was a physical manifestation of a geopolitical escape hatch. In the early stages of 2008, the first contracts were signed in total secrecy. The lead contractor was not a Western giant like Exxon or Shell, but the China Petroleum Engineering and Construction Corporation. This was the first clue that the project was more than just an infrastructure upgrade. It was a strategic alliance. The Emirates needed the pipeline built fast, and they needed a partner who wouldn't be swayed by the shifting winds of Middle Eastern diplomacy. However, as the first sections of 48-inch diameter steel pipe were laid, a series of unexplained delays began to plague the project. Shipments of specialized valves from Europe were held up in customs for months without explanation. Satellite imagery from the period shows unusual activity near the construction sites, with unidentified vehicles scouting the perimeter. It became clear that certain regional players were not interested in seeing the UAE gain an alternative route to the sea. If the pipeline succeeded, the Hormuz option would lose its potency. Share your thoughts in the comments on whether you believe infrastructure or military hardware is the more effective tool for regional stability. By the summer of 2010, the pressure on the project reached a breaking point. The desert environment was a brutal adversary. Temperatures in the interior often exceeded 50 degrees Celsius, causing the massive steel pipes to expand and contract with such force that they threatened to buckle the very foundations they were laid upon. To manage this, engineers had to develop a unique system of thermal expansion loops, adding millions to the cost and months to the timeline. Yet the technical challenges were nothing compared to the economic escalation occurring offshore. As the pipeline kept toward the Hajar Mountains, the cost of ensuring a single tanker passing through the Strait of Hormuz tripled. Lloyd's of London declared the Gulf a high-risk zone. This was the quietest form of warfare, the war of premiums. Every dollar added to the insurance of a barrel of oil was a victory for those who wanted to prove that the Strait was the only thing that mattered. The investigation into the project's financing reveals another layer of complexity. The money was funneled through the International Petroleum Investment Company, a sovereign vehicle of Abu Dhabi. But deep within the ledgers, analysts found a series of peculiar transactions. Large sums were being moved into the development of deep-water berths at Fujairah that were far larger than what the pipeline alone would require. It suggested that the plan wasn't just to bypass the Strait, but to replace it entirely as a regional hub. Then came the first major conflict. In late 2010, a series of mysterious technical failures struck the main pump station 1 at Habshan. Critical control software was corrupted by a sophisticated digital intrusion, similar in architecture to the malware that had recently targeted other regional industrial sites. The pipeline wasn't even finished, and it was already under attack in the 5th domain. The message was clear. If you try to route around the choke point, we will choke the route itself. The project was forced into a defensive crouch. Security was tightened, and the timeline was pushed back yet again. For the global energy markets, the situation looked bleak. To the outside observer, the UAE's $3 billion pipe looked like a white elephant, a monument to a strategic dream that was being strangled by technical glitches and sabotage. By the end of 2011, the world was on the brink of a systemic collapse. Iran, facing a total embargo on its oil exports, intensified its naval drills in the Strait. The rhetoric shifted from "we might close it" to "the closure is being prepared." Military analysts estimated that if the Strait were blocked, the price of oil would hit $200 per barrel within 72 hours. The global supply chain, already fragile from the financial crises of the previous years, would simply cease to function. In Washington and London, the talk was of freedom of navigation operations. The U.S. Fifth Fleet moved a second aircraft carrier strike group into the region. Minesweeping exercises became a weekly occurrence. The world was preparing for a kinetic clash, a battle of steel and fire in the narrow waters. The human cost was expected to be staggering, with thousands of sailors at risk, and the potential for a regional conflict that could last for years. There was a moment of false hope in early 2012 when diplomatic back channels suggested a compromise was possible. But the negotiations fell through over the issue of uranium enrichment levels. The Hormuz trap was closing. Every piece of data suggested that the global economy was one mistake away from a catastrophic event. The UAE's pipeline was still months away from being operational, or so the official reports claimed. This was the darkest point for the project. The International Petroleum Investment Company was facing internal criticism for the massive cost overruns. Rumors circulated in the financial press that the project was being abandoned, that the technical hurdles of the Hajar Mountains were insurmountable, and that the pump stations were permanently compromised by the earlier cyber attacks. The world stopped looking at Fujairah and turned its eyes back to the warships in the Strait. But then, the investigation uncovers a series of anomalies in the export data from the port of Jebel Ali. Large quantities of specialized technical equipment, ostensibly for the construction of shopping malls, were being diverted to the eastern coast under the cover of night. While the world believed the pipeline was a failure, a massive clandestine effort was underway to finish the final 80 kilometers through the most difficult terrain on the peninsula. The last drop of hope for the opposition arrived in June of 2012. A freak weather event, a rare cyclone in the Gulf of Oman, caused massive flooding in the valleys of the Hajar Mountains. The construction sites were buried under tons of mud and debris. The official statement from the contractors was grim. The damage would take 6 months to repair. To Tehran, this was the final proof that nature itself was on the side of the Strait. Their leverage was absolute. However, the failure was a masterstroke of deception. The investigation into the logistical logs of the China Petroleum Engineering and Construction Corporation reveals that the critical sections of the pipeline had actually been completed and pressure tested weeks before the storm. The reported damage was superficial, affecting only the temporary housing and access roads. The pipeline itself was intact, purged of air, and ready for its first charge of light sour crude. The breakthrough came on July 15, 2012, without any fanfare, without a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and without a single press release. The valves at Habshan were opened. 1 million barrels of oil began their journey across the desert, climbing over the mountains and descending toward the Indian Ocean. When the first tanker, a vessel named the M-Star, docked at Fujairah terminal, the strategic map of the world changed forever. The mystery of the missing $3 billion was finally solved. The money hadn't just gone into a pipe, it had gone into a global insurance policy. By creating a viable, large-scale alternative to the Strait, the UAE had stripped the Hormuz option of its economic power. If Iran closed the Strait, the UAE could still export nearly 3/4 of its total production. More importantly, the existence of the pipeline meant that the global market no longer had to price in the total collapse scenario. The final twist in the investigation reveals that the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline was just the first piece of a larger puzzle. Shortly after it became operational, Saudi Arabia quietly upgraded its own east-west pipeline, which connects the giant ADCOP fields to the Red Sea. Together, these two pieces of infrastructure now allow over 6 million barrels of oil per day to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. The choke point is no longer a noose around the neck of the world. It is merely a side road. The quiet weapon had won. Infrastructure had achieved what fleets of warships could not. It had decoupled the global economy from the geography of a single, narrow waterway. Today, the port of Fujairah has grown into the second largest bunkering hub in the world, a forest of storage tanks that serves as a physical buffer against energy shocks. The $3.3 billion spent on ADCOP didn't just build a pipeline, it purchased the irrelevance of a threat. The Strait of Hormuz remains a flashpoint, and warships still patrol its lanes. But the leverage that once allowed a single sentence from Tehran to move the global markets is gone. The investigation proves that in the modern world, the most effective way to win a war is often to ensure that the enemy's primary weapon simply no longer matters. The steel is in the ground, and the oil flows to the east, far away from the narrow waters where history was once held hostage. The strategic silence of the desert remains, but the math of the Middle East has been permanently rewritten. $3.3 billion was the price of a checkmate.